in the midst of continuing with the Armory Phase 2 renovations. At the beginning of the process, we elected to add the sprinkler system and plan for it during the renovation process. So we were able to have KCI engineer the upgrade to the water service, as well as obtain the WSSC permits. Once we completed that, we were able to solicit 3 companies for bids to actually install the wet pipe and a dry pipe automatic sprinkler system throughout the Armory, and it does also include a dry system in the garage area. So we did get those 3 bids back. The 3 companies that submitted information were Independent Sprinklers LLC of Laurel for $59,440. Livingston Fire Protection Incorporated of Hyattsville for $101,645, and Encon Corporation of Hyattsville for $118,725. The funding for this is in the CIP as the Armory Phase 2 sprinkler project. After review of departmental staff and the fire marshal, we would like to recommend that the mayor and city council approve the bid provided by Independent Sprinklers for $59,440. They have completed other work with the city, and we have been satisfied with their work.
Thank you. Council, questions? Ms. Nicholas?
It seems like it's a really big difference. Do you have any idea why, or?
There don't seem to be any irregularities in the contract. They have done business with us. The Encon Corporation is the company that is currently doing the work at the Army, and I don't know if this is, if they're the sub that they provided, just provided a higher price, but there don't seem to be there's no irregularities that we see.
Mr. Lennox?
Along with that, is this work being bonded? Do they have to post a bond?
Yes.
Is it the normal bond for improvements? Or is it a percentage bond, or?
It's the normal bond.
Big difference. Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
I'm fine with this.
Mr. Smalls?
Ms. Barr, I'm just curious to know the difference between the wet pipe and the dry.
The dry
System
system
is-
that's going to be in the garage area will not have water running through the pipes. That area does not have heat. The only portion of the project that will have heat will be in the closet, correct, where the water comes into, or where it comes into the building, out in the garage. So there wouldn't be any chance for it to freeze in the pipes
Okay,
and,
so that's the only reason
Right,
then it has
right.
nothing to do with anything other than that?
right.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barr. Let's go back to item number 1 and show.
She's not ready yet.
She's late.
She's not ready yet. She's gonna go to the next item.
Yes, I mean, I'll continue to push it back.
Okay.
Item,
you.
Item number 3, we pulled from the, staff has asked us to pull that, so that's gonna be put off. Ordinance number 4 on the agenda is ordinance number 1877, text amendment number 242, and ordinance amending the Laurel City Code, Chapter 20, Land Development and Subdivision Regulations, Article 1, zoning, to amend the Division 1 in general and Division 3, City Planning Commission, Division 4, Board of Appeals, Division 5, Zoning Districts, Division 6, Parking and Loading Facilities, Division 7, Sign and Advertising Structures, Division 9, Exceptions and Supplements to the Zone Regulations, to add Section 20-20.9, Small Wind Energy Systems, Division 13, Historic District Commission, to add Section 20-25.9, Preservation of Demolition of Neglect and Repealing in in its entirety, Division 16, Community Design Standards, amending the Laurel City Code, Chapter 20, Land Development and Subdivision Regulations to add Appendix D, parking modification zones, and providing for an effective date. Mr. Brown.
Yes, Mr. President, this is a text amendment. We haven't amended the Urban Land Development Code for the past 18 months because of the moratorium that was declared for preparing the master plan. What this does is actually update the current code. It adds current definitions. It adds a vice chairman to the planning board and Board of Appeals, which currently does not have vice chairmen. It amends the table of uses to add the new definitions that were added in the earlier part of the code. It puts standards for parking modifications. Presently, if you're in a parking modification area, you can request a parking modification. However, there are no standards to determine whether they should be granted or not. Additionally, the parking modification map was in the master plan. That has been taken out because if you change the parking modification area, then you have to go back to the master plan and go through that entire process to amend it. So this is taken out of the master plan and placed in this ordinance, so it'll be part of the land development code. That's essentially what is before you.
Okay, a couple things that I've got. For major developments, are we still requiring 1.5 parking spaces per unit?
Yes.
I'd like to sometime have a communication between the council and you and the mayor on upping that to 2 full parking spaces per. I think that we've seen where these apartments don't have 1 car anymore, houses don't have 1 car anymore, they have 4 and 5. And I think we have to have a discussion about that somewhere in the future.
Yes, sir.
The other thing that I would like to ask you is, on the small wind energy systems, what do you see that looking like?
Those do not look like windmills. They look like poles. They cannot exceed 15 feet in height, and it's got little twisters on the side so it goes vertically, but it does not have propellers like you would see on a wind turbine.
I understand what a windmill is, but and I've only seen them in large demonstrations. What do you, I'm trying to see what small looks like. What does that, where would that apply? How would we get there? A small wind farm?
No, this would only be for putting a wind generation on a house, similar to what you would be doing for a solar array. And it would only allow 1 per house, and it could not exceed 15 feet in height.
Like Miss Mills expressed when she saw one up in Delaware.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Miss Nicholas? Mr. Les?
No questions.
Miss Crary?
I noticed language about the demolition by neglect.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that gonna be handled by zoning or?
That will be handled both by zoning and code enforcement.
And
Both.
code enforcement, right?
And code enforcement, yes, ma'am.
Would it constitute a taking, or what are we doing here? It would be fines, or?
What would happen is you would be noticed if you did not repair the damage within 30 days, then you would get a second notice. If you still didn't, then the city could go in, abate,
Okay,
and then lien the property.
okay.
Mr. Ferry, this also may be part and parcel to something that I'm working on with the administration, dealing with blighted houses and housing that in the city that is just overrun with weeds, and we will be discussing this in work sessions probably in October or something like that soon. Okay, Mr. Smalls.
Mr. Brock, if I mention your comments on Division 16, community design standards repealing.
Yes, sir.
Is that totally repealing? Is that?
That's
being-
totally repealing. That was an idea that was put in place maybe 5 years ago. It created a committee that would have reviewed all architectural standards. They met one time and it became so burdensome that it never met again. But we have the ability, when we have an MXT or an overlay, to do the same thing, is to review the architectural renderings and approve them or get them changed.
So I understand the committee and abolishing that since it didn't meet. But repealing any design standards concerns me in that having design standards, at least in my mind, helps us hold a developer, a builder, to meet certain criteria in terms of how we want development in our city to appear. So, for example, in my mind, design standards would cover things like burying utilities underground versus overhead wiring. Design standards could talk to facades on buildings, awnings, or no awnings, or the kind of planters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a number of things that kind of uniform the appearance of the city based on perhaps a particular zone, whether it's city center or whether it's one of our other overlay areas, that sort of thing. So to me, not having anything, having sat on the planning commission for as long as I have, to not have anything to help guide the commission, for example, in terms of what we want our city to generally look like, seems,
Well, we still have design standards in the historic districts.
yeah, but
And like I say, if you're in a revitalization overlay area, or if you are in a historic district, or if you are in an MXT, we still have the ability to regulate the designs of structures. The design standards that were in there were like pitches of roofs, the number of stories, the linear appearance, those sorts of things.
and I'm not gonna, argue it back and forth, but I just think, design standards, I think, is something that, I got what you're saying, and I understand that, but not having, some sort of design standards, and I don't know if this, repealing this is repealing, the committee, or just, doing away totally with any written design standards. The mayor shaking his head no.
No,
So,
no, we're trying to give the commission more flexibility,
Mhm.
but there's nothing to say that the commission can't adopt their own standards on the design. I think what the piece that you've taken out is just what Jack said. They weren't used anyways.
I understand.
So it's probably better off, if the commission wants to, since it's looking at the overall city, compared to what talking about the pieces he just talked about, the historical district area as well as the overlay. There's direction already done by that through council, but the commission itself could do their own type of standards so that you're having some continuity, I think is what you're asking
Exactly.
for
Yeah.
that. So, But that's, that piece there that's being taken out is,
Nothing to do with that.
I don't believe so. That's why.
So you don't feel it's as strong as what they can do on their own? Or they're more comprehensive?
Well, I think there's two different pieces here. I think that each of the commissioners, like the other commissions, they have a lot of authority and they can give direction and make motions and require certain things at their level. But I think what Councilman's talking about is trying to keep some kind of continuity between the commission itself and its members go and come, or
Absolutely.
those types of things. But again, I think there could be some broad standards, just like the HDC has.
That's correct.
And you guys could adopt that yourself. Would be my
Okay.
my 2 cents worth.
Read through it and
Yeah.
as you, between now and Monday, and if you have any questions, contact Mr. Fleming to have a discussion with.
I will definitely do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mayor,
sir.
Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Yes.
if I could, let me ask two more questions since we got to the tail end of this pretty quick. What does privileged lien mean?
That's
John?
under by neglect.
No. We talk about lien establishment.
Mhm.
So we go and file a lien against a piece of property for the work the city did.
Yes, sir.
What does privileged lien mean?
I believe it's that we're number one when the property is,
The mortgage is number one.
okay.
So that's what I'm concerned about. Is this a bit misleading here? That, I'm just asking a question, and I'll throw that out. The other question I had, and I noticed it today when I was looking at this, why is there a piece of property on Prince George Street in the 300 block, and I think it's, let's see, 975-333, that's in the parking modification zone? It's in the
This-
residential area.
This is the map that was within the master plan.
Well, I'm telling you.
I don't know why.
I lived with that parking modification zone for a long time on the planning commission. This is a mistake. That is a
Right.
residential property. Okay? So it
We'll-
runs
We'll
from
adjust it.
339 all the way down to the post office. Because even Warren's Clinic was not in the modification zone. I'm just making that statement. There's something wrong with this picture. It may be in somewhere, but I don't believe that was ever included in the modification zone. You see which one I'm talking about?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it runs from 339 on the corner, on that side of the street, runs down to the vacant building, which was Warren's Clinic. Okay, because like I say, Warren's Clinic was not in the modification zone, but the post office is. Because that was where the, whatever was down there before they built the post office. Okay, so if you just take a look at that, Jack, I think
Will
that's a
do.
mistake. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions from Mr. Brock? Seeing none, thank you, sir. We'll move on to item number 5, which is a draft ordinance of the Mayor and City Council of Laurel, amending the code of the City of Laurel, Chapter 11, Planning and Development, Section 11-4, adoption of a master plan to reflect the recent adoption of the new master plan for the City of Laurel. Mr. Brock?
Mr. President, this is the codification of the master plan. It's replacing the old master plan ordinance was 1572. The one that was recently adopted is 1873. That's all that this does.
Questions from Mr. Brock? Ms. Nicholas? Mr. Les?
I'm fine with this, Mr. President.
Ms. Crary?
Fine.
Mr. Smalls?
No questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Okay, we'll move on here to item number 6. This is a draft charter resolution of the Mayor and City Council of Laurel, amending Article 400, administration of the Charter of the City of Laurel to reflect a reorganization of the city by amending Section 465, Director of the Department of Development Management, and by amending section 465, excuse me, I skipped it, and adding section 466, Director of the Department of the Fire Marshal and Permit Services, to reflect the division of the Department of Planning and Zoning into the Department of Economic and Community Development and the Department of the Fire Marshal and Permit Services. Mr. Rock.
Mr. President, this is a resolution amending the city charter to do two things. The first is to change the name of the Department of Development Management to the Department of Economic and Community Development, and secondly, to establish the Department of the Fire Marshal and Permit Services, and the creation of the Director of the Department.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from Mr. Brock? Ms. Nicholas? Ms. Glennis?
Fine.
Ms. Query?
Fine.
Mr. Smalls?
Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. All right, we'll move on to item number 7. This is a draft ordinance of the Mayor and City Council of Laurel, amending the Code of the City of Laurel, Chapter 8, Licenses, Permits, and Business Regulations, to amend Section 8-6, Miscellaneous License Fees, and to repeal Schedule A, License Fees and License Fee Schedule, and B, Permit Fee Schedules for the purpose of removing such fees from the city code and amending sections 8-21, 8-25, and 8-55 to reflect the change. Mr. Brock.
Mr. President, this is an ordinance to amend the license, permit, and business regulations to remove the fee schedule that's currently in the code. The code currently allows the mayor to set the fees as he sees fit. This deletes it from the code, which would require that it be amended each time fee was increased or decreased. This allows the mayor to set the fee as he does in the all other instances, his building codes, zoning applications, and so forth.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Smalls.
No questions at this time. Thank
You
you.
need some time?
If you come back
Sure.
to me,
All right, Ms. Query?
But the fees will still have a standard, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
They'll be printed someplace.
Normally that's done during the annual budget process where the fees are reviewed and amended.
Thank you.
Mr. Les?
I'm fine with this.
Ms. Nicholas?
I'm fine.
Mr. Smalls?
I'm staying.
Okay.
I'm fine.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Move on to item number 8, an ordinance to amending the city code, Article 7, Property Standards, Chapter 18, Building and Building Regulations, Division 1, Storage and Unregistered, Inoperable, Dismantled, Partially Dismantled, and Wrecked Motor Vehicles and Trailers, Snow and Ice Removal, and Division 2, accumulation of noxious conditions, etc., and providing an effective date. Mr. Brock,
Mr. President,
this will be a good one.
this is dealing with a problem that has been in effect for some time, which is the parking of unregistered vehicles on private parking lots and parking zones and loading zones and no parking zones. What this does is makes that use illegal. It also changes the notice from 48 hours to, from 5 days to 48 hours. That's essentially the ordinance. Yes, sir. We've had a lot of parking at the parking lot up behind Marshall, Staggers, Bray Green. We're trying to, in this fashion, deal with the problem and start issuing citations. People are, what they're doing is they're going to the auto auction, buying them, putting them all over the city, and then we're having to ticket them and notify the property owners, which in a lot of instances, they are not aware that people have been putting cars on their property. So this is hopefully a way of dealing with that.
Okay, I certainly have noticed a increase in the removal of vehicles that have been on property and been there too long. And I want to give credit to the staff that have been taken, I know. But I just think that that's a great thing to do. The one question I have, and I'll ask our council to kind of give me an answer on this. In defining obnoxious, what someone considers to be obnoxious, someone else is going to be considering it to be art or something else. And how are we going to define that?
Council.
I'll make it up. Well, I think the main purpose of this is, as Mr. Brock said, what's been happening, and it's particularly in one area of the town. What's the name of that area? It's the Commerce Center. And what we've been noticing is they are unloading cars from auctions that are not licensed at all, have no registration, no license. They're dropping them off at the Commerce Center, and they're parking them everywhere in that center, in the driveways, in the parking areas. And so the people that come in there to try to use the facilities, there's not even any parking places. And when you drive in there, it was striking. You could see all of the cars without license plates on them parked in that area. And so the real purpose of this ordinance is, number one, to make it illegal to be blocking the road lanes or the travel lanes in those types of areas by parking these types of cars in there. And the second thing that we noticed is that what has to happen when a car is considered abandoned. A car is abandoned if, number one, it's inoperable, or number two, it's not licensed or registered, okay? And we had a requirement in our code that we had to mark such a car. Police had to mark it, in other words, put a notice on it for 5 days before we could come back and tow it. All right? The state law only requires 2 days, so we were 3 days beyond what the state code was requiring. So we fixed that. Frankly, what's obnoxious in terms of all this is going to be, probably in the discretion of the code people as to what's really causing a nuisance. Probably nuisance would even be a better word, as to what's causing a nuisance in these areas. And, I think it's going to be pretty much up to the discretion of the code people. But the purpose of the ordinance, for the most part, is exactly what I just told you. If I don't know if you've driven in there, but
Driven it.
yeah, it's a problem, and that's what we're trying to address here.
What about adding boats to this? Do you have any objection to that?
Adding boats to it?
Yes. I know where there are boats in people's backyards that have been there forever. And I consider that to be a blight. They've just been sitting there and never used. And
Is there any
Just
kind of
collect-
any kind of
collect-
registration on them or anything like that?
I'm sorry.
Any kind of registration or current?
Like I said, there's no registration on them. They've just been sitting there.
I mean, I don't know that I would tack it onto this ordinance. I think maybe that's an independent thing that we could maybe take a look at and then possibly come up with an ordinance to address that separately. I think this is a specific problem that I know the chief of police and Mr. Fleming and Mr. Brock have been dealing with for quite a while. We've been talking about it in the Wednesday staff meetings for a long time, and we've done site visits and everything else. And this is finally, we tried to get even the landlord over there to maybe get a private towing contract and try to address it that way. We've had all kinds of ideas about how to deal with this, and this is finally an ordinance that attempts to deal with it. And I think probably we should stick to that purpose in this ordinance, and then maybe take a look at your separate problem with boats in another ordinance.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But you're already dealing with an issue of exactly what I'm talking about, and that is that you have boats, some are on trailers, some are not. And they are, like I said, they're blights, and why couldn't we just add that in as a friendly amendment to
I
this?
suppose we could. I suppose we could.
Mayor?
I think it deserves some further discussion. What about campers? What about, I mean, you could go on this, and it could create a door, or send us down a path that I'm not sure you may want to go to. I don't know. I just think it would require some extra discussion regarding that, and anything else.
Okay,
I mean, I know people that have 7 cars in their parking lot, in their driveway. To me, that's a nuisance.
yeah.
What are you gonna do? They're all legal, and to have 7 people, they got 7 cars. So there are some things there that I just think we should
Okay,
talk about.
okay. Mr. Fleming?
If I could add to that, what we're trying to deal with right now is primarily a public safety issue. These cars that are being parked in the Commerce Center make it near, if not impossible, for an ambulance to get to any of the businesses that are down there. The primary complaint that we're getting from a lot of the businesses down there is that their customers, their clients have no place to park with all these cars down there. So we're not necessarily trying to address a blight issue here. We're trying to address a public safety. And if we could go ahead with this, we will certainly look at your concerns and possibly do an amendment to this. But we would like to try and get this done as
Okay.
soon as humanly possible.
That's fair. I have no problem with that. Mr. Smalls?
I just wanted to add that I've had more than one business owner in that complex to call me directly with exactly this issue. So I've talked to CA, I've talked to the mayor about it, and I know it's been something that the administration has been working on. So delaying this any further just exacerbates the issue that's already a very serious problem. I've been down there a few times. And I was honestly tempted for this work session to have some photos presented on screen so you could really see how bad the situation really is down
No,
there.
I have no intentions of delaying anything. I just, again, thought it was maybe a good place, and I'll take it up with the administration and we'll talk about it.
Well, if we could go ahead with this, it allows us more time to focus on your issue to make sure that legislation is drafted appropriately.
Not a problem.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Nicholas? Mr. Liz?
Yeah, let me, I don't know what the law is now. At one time, the state frowned on open titles because that's how people that are actually dealing cars get away without registering as car dealers. They're holding a handful of open titles, but they don't have a license to deal cars. Now, I know we went ahead and cleared the parking lot out behind Snyder's. Because I called, we talked about it, went down, did something down there. All of a sudden, the cars were gone. But now what I see is the BP got a lot back there filled with cars, no tags. Okay, right next to Bishop Gurley's house that they're trying to sell. I sure wouldn't want to live next to it. I think there's a bigger problem going on here. As they would say in some places, we're a cheap date in Laurel. Because we're letting them get away with breaking the law. And like I say, these are people that are holding a handful of titles. They bought these cars. They're open titles. So it has the person that sold the car, which doesn't even have to be notarized anymore. They've signed it, but it hadn't been assigned to anybody. So again, I think that whatever we can do to tighten up our rules so that we're not being facilitators here is to the benefit of the public. And as you said, going down to the Commerce Center, there's a safety problem down there. It's a big safety problem down there sometimes. I mean, I wouldn't want to have to go down in a fire engine at night. Probably hit 3 or 4 going in. But again, whatever we can do to tighten it up, so. And again, coming back to the boat issue, the issue with the boats is typically you get them on the trailers not being registered. Not so much the boats, because you can put anything on the back of a trailer. But if the trailer's not registered, that falls under motor vehicle laws, the trailers, not the boat. So again, thank you, Mr. President.
Ms. Creer.
Thank you. I do prefer the word nuisance to obnoxious. I think that's more copacetic. The Commerce Center, is that public, owned by private entity? Is that what's going on there?
Yes.
The private people working on old vehicles, they may not reach antique level, but I believe, and the deputy chief can correct me, I think if they're covered and on blocks, they're legal, but they would have to be in a neat condition. So we don't wanna run car enthusiasts, this town, we have like 4 or 5 car shows a year, I think, that may not be antique. So those would be my only
They
concern.
have to be eligible for the antique tags, don't they?
Right,
Yeah,
and a lot of them
yeah.
aren't.
Yep.
Thank you.
One last question from me. When we're talking about trailers here, can we be more definitive about what that means? A trailer could be a motorized home without a steering wheel? Are we talking about just a small utility trailer? And if it's got a license plate on it and it's sitting on grass, is that not in the same realm here?
Where exactly are you?
In our code, a trailer is defined as it's a vehicle that is on wheels and is not self-propelled. It has to be hooked up to something, it's a trailer. That's in our own code,
And that would be on the street or off the street,
either, yes.
correct? I'm sorry?
Well,
Well, that's what I'm making sure of. Because I've been getting some complaints and I just want to make sure that we're covering that. Okay, thank you. Anything else from anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Brock. I think we're all set for this, right? Okay. We'll move on to item number 9, which is the FY 16 budget amendments. Ms. Saylor.
Mr. President, this ordinance is our final adjustment to the FY 2016 budget. It's an overall increase of $2,309,023. The largest part of that is that in February, when we executed a new loan with PNC Bank, as well as consolidating 2 existing loans, we are required to record the closure of the existing 2 loans as an expenditure and show the payoff as loan proceeds. So 1.6 million of this 2.3 million is to record that transaction without going over the budgets in the debt service account. Additionally, there's $2,262 of the transit overlay tax that was collected and not budgeted, but there's an offsetting expenditure for that. Also, we had additional income tax, which we're using to offset a decrease in the usage of the unassigned fund balance. Additional admissions and amusement tax that was collected is proposed to make an additional $100,000 contribution to the pension fund. We collected $67,892 above the budget in highway user revenues. Those have to be dedicated for public works issues, specifically street maintenance. So that money would be transferred to the capital improvement program with an ordinance to follow as far as setting up the project for the appropriation of those funds. Red light camera ticket revenue exceeded the budget, so increasing that by $483,962. $83,962 of that number goes to the police department budget. With an increase in revenue, there's a corresponding increase in the processing fees, so that will cover that. The remaining $400,000 is proposed to be transferred to the CIP, again with projects to be brought before you at a later time. $44,505 in other miscellaneous revenues is also has a corresponding expenditure in the community promotions budget. These are the financial activities of the 4th of July committee, which we show in our budget, though the monies are kept entirely separate from the city's bank account. The $1,000,006 for the loan payoffs that I already discussed, and then the decrease that where we had budgeted the use of the unassigned fund balance and did not require to use those funds. So that's a change off with local income tax. There's a decrease in the city administrator's budget to cover a shortfall based on an adjustment to the interest budget of the new loans and the current loans. So that's just a transfer within down to the 10655 budget. Again, the 44,505, for our purposes, the 4th of July activities are a balancing effect on the revenue side and the expenditure side of our budget. There were other transfers. There was a custodian reassignment during the year, so the 6655 is just another transfer for the salaries from one facility, from the police department to the, or actually, I'm sorry, from the Public Works facility to the police department facility. Again, the red light camera processing fees. There was an employee that retired in the Department of Public Works for annual and comp leave that is on the books at the time. We're required to pay out those funds, so there's a transfer necessary from the vehicle maintenance budget to be transferred into Public Works admin. There was actually a remaining balance in the snow and ice removal budget. Again, proposing to take that excess and move it to the capital improvement program for a total transfer of $517,892. The other transfers I've already discussed. Again, the debt service, principal and interest, and the additional pension contribution of $100,000.
Okay, I don't want to catch you off guard here, but just for my own edification, if you will, how much further than where we are now with the highway user funds, how much further would we have to go before we would be back to where we were when this all started to slide?
Based on what was collected during fiscal 2016, was still $100,000 short of our last highest year, which was FY 2009. That was $799, and I believe our total now is $699.
So again, that's something we want to make sure.
And we slipped, because at one time we were at 933, I thought, before they started cutting. I mean, 9 was a big year, I thought. Or at one time it was 933, something
Yeah.
like that.
I just remember 2009 was the
I knew it
last
was before
highest
that,
year we
yeah.
had. It went from 799 down to
I think
35,000
that was
the
before
next
that.
year.
But my point is that there's something that we should continue to push with the Hogan administration to try and get those numbers up. You know, I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the reason I'm asking. Okay, I'm sorry, Ms. Nicholas?
Item is a 10-5-10 municipal pool program. That's about $2,000 there, it's on the second page. It's 10-5-10,
Yes.
that $2,000 is,
It was a transfer to the Greenview Drive pool for supplies.
transferred to,
Transferred from the Main Street pool to the Greenview Drive pool.
Mr. Liz?
Thank you, Mr. President. Michelle, just, let's go to the first page of this document, this ordinance. I've got the employee insurance reserve, vehicle fuel reserve, a utility reserve, and then I get to emergency equipment fund. Is that also a reserve?
Yes.
Okay, for some reason, it's just labeled differently, because everything else is reserve.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
Just a suggestion, you might want to put the reserve on at the end of that. Looks good, thanks. Thank you, Mr. President.
Ms. Curry?
same area. So these are projects that'll come up before us at a later date, these reserve funds, and they're to be treated as a rainy day fund?
The employee insurance fund, so the idea here is to take funds that are already in the unassigned fund balance and create these reserves. So we don't currently have the employee insurance reserve or the vehicle fuel reserve or the utility reserve. We don't have those, but we can make the proper transaction recording that will create them based on, again, some of the overages and the revenues and the savings and the expenditures that we feel that once the audit is complete, you know, those funds are available now, but they could possibly be replenished at this time. There is a concern by Mr. Green regarding the health insurance premiums that we'll be facing in the coming month. He's working with the broker now. So we just thought that the time was right to recommend that we have these funds in place in case while he always budgets an increase, that there was some concern that based on the experience and what's happening in the market, that if we possibly didn't budget enough, as it would turn out, that we would have funds to fall back on.
And I get that, my concern is we're creating about 5 reserve funds here, and I just want to make sure that they're reserve funds and that's how they're treated, that they're rainy day. If we get into trouble down the road and revenues are cut and whatever else, just like the rising prices on the insurance, that we leave those funds there until we absolutely need them.
Right, these reserves, as the ones that already exist, would have their own separate general ledger account.
Yep.
And to use them, we would be required to come back to you with an ordinance to actually put that money into the budget to then expend it if necessary.
May.
We will, as we've done with the other reserve accounts, set up a policy as well, but none of this money can be moved without council action.
Okay. Ms. Saylor, anything else?
No, sir.
Mr. Smalls?
Michelle, I want to direct us back to 46,200 police fines. And just for my understanding for the record, you pointed out of the 483.9 that 83.9 is going to the police department, 400,000 to CIP, for undesignated projects.
Correct.
I just wanted to be absolutely sure. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay. Do, council, do we have anything else from Mr. Saylor? Okay. Then let's get back, thank you all. Let's get back to fracking. Would you come forward, please, and give me your name and address? And you have the floor. Press the little green button down. Oh. Press that button down, it'll turn green. There you go.
My name is, can you hear me now? My name is Shilpa Shelvi. I live at 9119 Briarchip Street in Laurel. And I have asked Brooke to come down today to talk about fracking.
Hello, my name is Brooke Harper, and I'm the Maryland Outreach Coordinator for the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And we are working with the Don't Frack Maryland Coalition across the state to institute a permanent fracking ban in Maryland in the upcoming 2017 legislature. So I did just want to give you some information about fracking and also to ask you if you would introduce an ordinance or a resolution in support of a statewide ban. And so I just wanted to share with you some of the information that we've gathered over the years since the moratorium was put in place. Move on to the. So that is actually my grandfather, Lucius Pete Harper, and you may be wondering why I'm starting out with a picture of my grandfather and a fracking presentation. And the reason for this is he was the father of 7 sons and 1 daughter in Frostburg, Maryland. And one of the things that he did to protect his family was he actually went up to before his city council in Frostburg to integrate the Frostburg community pool. And the reason for this was because his children always had to swim in unsafe creek beds and rivers, and they weren't protected. And so he took this measure to protect his family and work to integrate the community pools. And I still have 4 generations of my family that are living, working, and raising their families in Western Maryland. And I feel as in my work that I also get to continue the legacy of protecting my family by working to keep fracking out of Western Maryland. So what is fracking? Fracking is a dangerous drilling method that's used to extract natural gas from shale rock. It involves drilling L-shaped pipelines deep underground and pumping a mixture of water, sand, and toxic chemicals through them at high pressures to crack apart the rock and release gas packed within. Each well can require up to 8 million gallons of water and up to 40,000 gallons of chemicals. From one well site, it can take up to 2,000 tanker trucks per frack, and a well can be fracked up to 20 times. The chemicals used in fracking include known carcinogens such as benzene, and significant volumes of fracking fluid come back up to the surface loaded with heavy metals, toxic chemicals, and radioactive materials. The hazardous wastewater poses an enormous disposal challenge, and the toxic chemicals in fracking fluid threaten to leach into our drinking water. The industrial well pads, machinery, and truck traffic that come along with the drilling process disrupt rural towns, straining infrastructure, clogging roads, and adding to noise and air pollution. At the start of the boom in unconventional oil and gas development over 10 years ago, there were few studies on the potential impacts of this practice on surrounding communities and the environment. Over the last several years, we've seen the publication of hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific articles citing adverse health impacts, water contamination, climate change, and many other ills from this unconventional drilling method. A recent Johns Hopkins study shows that expectant mothers living in the most active area of fracking drilling and production activity were 40% more likely to give birth prematurely, and researchers are finding more and more concerning associations between proximity to gas development and increases in birth defects and other adverse birth outcomes. In neighboring Pennsylvania, families have found methane in their drinking water and have even documented being able to set their water on fire. During the fracking process, chemicals from fracking fluid can enter into water through various ways. Disposal of flowback wastewater during well completion can lead to increased salinity and levels of metals and also releases known carcinogens. In some states, there are reports that untreated wastewater has been sprayed directly on rural roads and forests and dumped into rivers and streams, leading to radioactive wastewater being discharged into rivers used to supply drinking water in Pennsylvania and Maryland. Fracking is estimated to use about 4 million gallons of water per well, and 25% of the water used in fracking is lost permanently. Garrett County already predicts water deficits in the next 2 decades, and this could be exacerbated by fracking. Many people consider fracking a Western Maryland problem, yet more and more evidence shows that fracking could have far-reaching impacts across Maryland. Fracking in Western Maryland could harm the health of Laurel residents by introducing new toxins into the Potomac River. The Potomac River, along with the Patuxent, is Laurel's primary source of water, and many of the Potomac's tributaries flow through Garrett, Allegheny, Washington, Frederick, and Montgomery counties, all of which lie over gas basins. There are several ways by which contaminants can travel from fracking operations upstream into the surface water and groundwater. Fracking chemicals could infiltrate surface water and groundwater after spills from trucking accidents, leaks from storage tanks on fracking well pads, and well blowouts. Regulations might reduce the risk of drinking water contamination, but no regulations could reduce the risk to acceptable levels, especially if there were hundreds of wells in operation. Unfortunately, the current proposed MDE regulations would not offer adequate protection. They've actually been rolled back, and the regulations would now only require a 300-foot setback between fracking well pads and most tributaries of the Potomac River. The proposed regulations would only require a 100-foot setback between streams and roads that the trucks carrying chemicals would travel on. Fracking chemicals could also infiltrate groundwater via well leakage. 10% of wells are known to actually fail within a decade. And then there's also the problem of the wastewater treatment. So highly toxic fracking wastewater can contaminate the Potomac River after being inadequately treated by centralized wastewater treatment plants, which is the main method of in-state wastewater disposal for Maryland. And fracking operations would most likely be sent to wastewater treatment plants. These plants would remove most of the contaminants in the wastewater and then release the decontaminated waters into rivers such as the Potomac River. However, research shows that fracking wastewater can still be highly contaminated even after being treated in centralized wastewater treatment plants. A 2013 study in the Journal of Environmental Science and Technology showed that the water that one centralized wastewater treatment plant in Pennsylvania was discharging into a river contained levels of strontium and barium that were significantly higher than the EPA's drinking water standards for those chemicals. There's also the problem with all of us living downstream or upstream of air emissions. There was a 30% rise in ethane levels in the Baltimore and Washington area from 2010 to 2013, and these ethane levels were directly correlated with the number of fracking operations in upland neighboring states. And concentrations rose when winds came from those fracking regions. Ethane in the atmosphere forms ozone, which causes respiratory issues, including increased asthma attacks, increased hospital admissions, increased daily mortality, and other markers of morbidity at elevated levels. We've also recently seen last week in Oklahoma abrupt increases in the earthquake rate that have occurred between 2009 and 2014. On Saturday, Oklahoma actually tied for the strongest earthquake ever recorded in the state, and the increase in frequency and magnitude of earthquakes stems not from the process of fracking, but actually from the storage of fracking wastewater at depths well below the fracking horizon. We've also seen in areas where fracking has come falling home prices, and Denver houses prices have fallen as much as 15%. And you can imagine that they would fall even more dramatically if the water was contaminated or there was a fracking spill. We've also seen, as with all environmental matters, that low-income communities and communities of color are always disproportionately impacted. In North Carolina, while Stokes County is 90% white, hydraulic fracturing took place in the majority minority community of Walnut Tree. There you have the NAACP, along with community members standing up against that. In California, studies show that students attending schools within 1 mile of wells are predominantly non-white, and 60.3% are Latino. In the last legislative session, we did a really good job in setting a really high target for Maryland to decrease its greenhouse gas emissions with the passage of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, which pledged a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2030. Unfortunately, with fracking on the horizon, Maryland may fall short on that goal. Methane is a primary component of natural gas and is 25 more times more potent in trapping heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. A recent study in Colorado cited that 4% of the methane produced by these wells is escaping into the atmosphere, and the carbon emissions of these wells is the carbon equivalent of 1 to 3 million cars on the road annually. And we do have a long history of fracking legislation in Maryland. In 2011, Governor Martin O'Malley issued an executive order to establish the Marcellus Shale Safe Drilling Initiative, which prompted the commission. In 2014, Maryland agencies determined that fracking can be done safely if it is highly regulated. And then in 2015, Maryland passed a 2.5-year moratorium. That moratorium will end in October of 2017, and the regulations that have put forth that O'Malley considered were the gold standard of fracking regulations have been significantly rolled back. I don't know about you, but I would not want a fracking well less than 1,000 feet from my home, and I certainly don't want it less than 1,000 feet from my family member's home. We are building a movement for a permanent ban in Maryland. Thus far, Prince George's County last April passed a ban on fracking within its borders, and Councilwoman Mary Lehman said that she specifically passed this ban to signal that we need a statewide ban. Montgomery County, which lies on the Culpeper Basin, they passed a fracking ban in 2014. Mountain Lake Park did so in 2012. Friendsville also just recently passed one this summer. Baltimore is working on one. Anne Arundel County, which has a de facto ban on fracking because they have permissive zoning, is sending a letter to their delegation saying that it is banned within their borders. Charles County just included it in its comprehensive plan, and I'm driving myself all over the state to make sure that more and more cities ban this practice and that I continue the legacy of my grandfather in keeping my family safe and keeping all of us safe from this dangerous practice. So I do ask you to consider these facts and to consider passing a resolution in support of a statewide ban on fracking. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming tonight and bringing this to our attention. We have all, I'm sure, heard of some of it. Mrs. Nicholas has gotten some information together for the council, so we will be looking at that information, and then we will take it at one of our work sessions and we'll discuss what we want to do.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much for your time. Do we have anything else to come before the council? Let's all go home.